This is Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. All talk and all crime, holding the powerful accountable for sexual assault, the brutal rape of Juanita Broaddrick by President Bill Clinton. That's tonight on Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. Juanita Broaddrick is a former owner and administrator of nursing homes in Arkansas. She alleged in 1999 that former President Bill Clinton raped her in April of 1978 when she was 35 years old. He was the Arkansas Attorney General. He was campaigning for governor at the time. President Clinton's attorney has denied the allegations when he was in the Oval Office White House time. Clinton has declined to comment directly on it over the years. Tonight on Forensic Talk, we seek and uncover the truth. Juanita's new book, you'd better put some ice on that, How I Survived Being Raped by Bill Clinton. It's her second time on our show, so welcome back, Juanita.
Oh, thanks, Jim. It's nice to be here.
Now, I always like to throw this in. We are not, this show, by nature, anti-Clinton or whatever. I voted for him once. One of the things that I believe is that sexual assault shouldn't be looked at through a conservative or a liberal vein, and unfortunately, too much of this is, you know, if you're conservative, I believe them, and if you're liberal, I don't believe them, or if you're mainstream medium, I believe her, and I don't believe her, and it just doesn't seem right to me. Sexual assault is sexual assault. Now, the second point I want to make is President Clinton has denied this through his lawyer, and I say we're going to seek the truth and uncover it. Well, how can I say that? I'm going to ask Juanita right off the bat. Bill Clinton apologized to you, didn't he?
Yes, back in 1991. I was at Little Rock for a nursing home seminar, and while we were in the meeting, someone comes to the door and says, Ms. Broaddrick is wanted outside. And so I get up and go outside, and the gentleman motions for me to go down around the corner by an elevator. And as I go around the corner, there stands Bill Clinton. And it was a shock. I had not been in his presence for all those years, and it was an absolute shock to me. He's standing there with two state policemen. I guess that's what they were. And he comes over to me and starts apologizing. And I'm standing there, Jim, in a state of shock, thinking, what in the heck is going on? And he begins to make statements like he's sorry for what happened, and he's a family man now, and he's a changed man. And he kept mumbling all these things to me, and I did not know what to even do. But I finally sort of backed up from him, and I told him, I said, you go to hell, and I walked off.
Let me ask you, Juanita, was he looking at you directly in the eye as he said this? Because I've met him, you've met him. I mean, you've seen the same thing. Was he looking you in the eye? Was it sincere?
Oh, yes, very sincere. Very sincere.
Okay.
In fact, I, at the moment, believed him, but I was so angry, you know, that he had even approached me again. And I remember during our lunch break, I had two nurses with me, and we began to talk about, you know, was he really sorry? Was he sorry for what he did? And at the moment, I felt bad about telling him saying what I said. And I went home with that on my mind. Was this man sincere? And then about 2 weeks later, he announced he was running for president. So that showed you the sincerity of it. I think he was just trying to cover up some loose ends.
And by the way, in your book, you also say your husband confronted him years later after a conference, and his answer,
right.
Clinton didn't deny it at all. In fact, he just said he didn't know that this person who's your husband.
But even if I had told him that.
Exactly, I know he was lying, but I'm saying is that Clinton essentially has admitted it twice to you and your then husband. So it's a little bit hard to believe that this is a completely made-up story. Now, tell us why you're writing this 40 years later.
Yeah, well, I didn't think I would ever write a book. When I came back from the inauguration in January, I just sat down at my computer over a period of about 2 months, and I thought, I need to get this all, down on paper. And I just started in writing about my life before Bill Clinton and the majority of my life after Bill Clinton. And it just sort of flowed out of me. And I took it and I wrote it all down, and I just sort of put it back. I didn't think anything of, about making a book out of it. I just wanted to have it down for my family, for history, for for their purposes. And so about 4 months ago, I was contacted by Nick Lully. He's an investigative reporter out of Jacksonville, Florida. And he was interested in doing like a, as he said, a serialized documentary about my life and about Bill Clinton. And I was interested in doing this, just like I said, for history. So I said, I've written it all down. Let me send it to you. And about 2 days later, he called me back and he said, this is a book. You need to go ahead and make a book out of this. So that's, with his help, that's what I did.
All right. I want to set the stage here for something I'm going to read, which is the actual description, which is brutal. But tell us, set the stage of how he ended up coming up to your room to begin with.
Sure. Back in 1978, I was a struggling nursing home owner, and I got involved in Bill Clinton's campaign for governor. I'd never been involved in politics before, but we were all so excited about him, Jim. He was such a charismatic person, and we thought it would be great for Arkansas. Well, my nursing home ended up on a tour that he was making, a campaign tour around Van Buren, and that's how I met him. And we had a photo op. That's the picture on the front of the book. And after that, he came over to me and started talking, very personable. While he talked to you, just like we said, he never lost eye contact with you. He made you seem like, he was extremely interested in what you had to say. And I began to express to him about the problems we were having in nursing homes, about reimbursement. And he immediately perked up and said, "Are you ever in Little Rock?" He said, "If you are," he said, "we need to talk about this at length." And I told him I would be down there in about 3 weeks. And so 3 weeks later, my nurse, Norma Rogers, and I traveled to Little Rock. It was on the evening after we left work of April the 24th, 1978. And the next morning when we got up, we called his campaign headquarters. And the young lady told me that he wasn't there. But what was so strange about that is she said, "Oh, Mrs. Hickey," that was my name at the time. She said, "Mr. Clinton said if you ever called, to call his apartment number," which I did. And he answered the phone. And I asked him, I said, would it be possible for us to come over at noon during our lunch break to talk to you? And he said, I'm not going to be at the headquarters today. And he said, "Why don't I just come to your hotel now? We can meet down in the Camelot coffee shop," I'd told him where we were staying. And I thought that was fabulous, that he would make the effort to drive over and see me. So I told Norma, I said, "You go on to the meeting, and when I get through, I'll come on to the meeting." So I waited in my room for him to call. And when he got to the hotel, he called my room, and he said, "It's so crowded down here, and there's reporters." He said, "Could we just discuss this and have coffee in your room?" Now, we're talking 40 years ago. I'm sure that I was a little bit alarmed, but I was talking to the Attorney General of my state. And I'm sure I didn't have any fear. I was probably uneasy, but I didn't have any fear in allowing that to happen. So eventually he came up, knocked on my door, and he came in. And what was so strange, when I opened the door, he was standing out there with his sunglasses on. And that should have been a tip-off right there, but it wasn't. And so I ushered him on in over to the table where the coffee was sitting. And we began to talk very congenially, and I started to talk about the files and everything, all the information I had worked on to show him. And he started to talk about a little building down below and motioned for me to come over to where he was. And as I walked over there, he put his arm around my shoulder to point to the building down below. And that made me very uneasy. And I backed away from him. And as I did, that's when he pulled me closer to him and started to kiss me. And I immediately said, "No, I don't want anything like this. I'm a married woman, but I have other things going on in my life." But at that point, he pushed me back onto the bed, And things went very bad from there. I
Okay,
was screaming.
this is where
Yeah.
I'm going to read this. This is from her book, so these are Juanita's words. He grabbed me again, and this time I realized he wasn't taking no for an answer. He pushed me backwards onto the bed. I began to panic and yell. Then he was on top of me, biting my lip. It was a shock and so painful. I began to taste the blood from my bleeding lip, and I was frightened. His hands were all over me. He tore at my clothes, ripping my skirt at the waist. He was so heavy I thought I wasn't going to be able to breathe. He would bite my lip if I started to yell. Then he would press down on my shoulder with one elbow while he tore at my clothes with his free hand. I truly thought I was going to die. He ripped my pantyhose completely away from the crotch area. I don't remember him undoing his pants. I just felt his bare skin against mine, and then the rape began. It was painful that I screamed. That's when the lip biting commenced again to quiet me. As long as I remained quiet, he could not bite me. At one point, I remember thinking, "Dear God, please let it be over soon." In a few minutes, it was over. He stopped moving. I was crying by then, and still he just laid there on top of me. I could hardly breathe. After 10 to 15 seconds, I heard him mumble, "I'm going to do it again." He started moving again. It was over in about a minute or less. I was sobbing uncontrollably. He stood there looking at me with an expression that's hard to describe. It was a cross between bewilderment and frustration. Then he said, "I'm sterile. I had mumps when I was a kid." I wanted to say, "You just raped me and that's what you have to say?" But all I could do was cry. He walked to the door, calmly put on his sunglasses, turned to me and said, "You better put some ice on that." Walked out the door. Entire encounter lasting less than an hour, changing my life forever. And, I kind of hate having to read something that descriptive, but, the thing is that people should hear. I mean, this is real assault.
Yeah, Jim, and even as you read the words, it still makes me tear up. I cannot believe that I had never been involved with anybody that had been raped or that this had occurred to. And it devastated me. I can't even begin to tell you how it's affected my life.
And let's just remind people again, we're talking about when Juanita was 35, she's now 75. So the intensity, it's another thing that really bothers me about sexual assault. It gives gratification to the perpetrator for a couple of minutes, and the victim spends 40 years suffering. Tell us again now, in that era, and even now, but in that era particularly, you end up blaming yourself, right?
Oh, yeah. I thought, how could I have been so ignorant and naive to have allowed that monster to come to my room? But back then, the rumors had not gotten around. I thought this was a respectful man that I could depend on to be alone in my room with and be able to talk to him about business matters. And I learned very quickly that that wasn't true.
And in fact, I say you actually had prepared a presentation on the nursing reimbursement cost and policy, so it wasn't like you had any other motive.
No, and I was so excited, Jim. I had worked for 2 evenings at home before I went down there, preparing graphs to try to show him that we were not able to give quality care to our residents. And it was the main thing on my mind.
All right, now let's fast forward to 3 weeks later, and you can explain to people why you would even do this. But you went to a Clinton fundraiser, and you're introduced to Hillary Clinton. Talk about that.
Right. I was still in a state of denial and still blaming myself. Prior to the rape, I had talked my good friends who have a beautiful home here in Van Buren, Buddy and Betty Criswell. Buddy was my dentist, and Betty and I played tennis together at the tennis club. And I had convinced them to have this fundraiser at their home. And I had called Betty the previous day, and I told her, I said, "I've had something come up, and I'm not going to be able to attend, but I'm going to run up there and give you some checks that people have given me for the campaign and some other information, but I won't be able to stay." So I went up there about 30 minutes prior and gave Betty the information, and the lady from the state campaign headquarters, I gave her the checks, and then I was going to get out of there. That was about 15 minutes before the fundraiser began. Then I see the Clintons come in the back door, and their driver, who was a good friend, Chuck Watts, a pharmacist here in Van Buren, rushes over to me and says, I just want you to know that the topic of the conversation all the way from the airport was about you. And, man, I froze. I thought, I've got to get out of here. So I start heading for the front door, but before I can get there, here comes Hillary Clinton, right straight for me. And at the moment I thought, here comes that poor woman that's married to that monster. What on earth am I going to say to her? So that was in my mind. She comes right over to me. She takes a hold of my hand, very pleasant, beautiful smile, and starts to tell me how happy she is to meet me and how appreciative she is for everything that I'm doing in the campaign to elect Bill. And I sort of nodded and turned to walk away. As I walk away, I feel somebody grab my arm from behind, and I thought someone's just wanting to tell me goodbye. I turn around, and it's Hillary Clinton. And there's no longer a pleasant smile. There's this very angry look as she pulls me to her, and she says, "Do you understand everything you do?" Man, I could have fainted right there. Now, when I think back 40 years ago, at that moment in time, I thought she knew what happened to me. To this day, I have no idea. She knew something, but I have no idea to the extent that she knew. But I feel like she was threatening me to keep quiet.
Now
I jerked my arm from hers and I left.
You're 100% certain that you didn't misinterpret what she was doing?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You'd have to have seen the demeanor and the way she held onto my arm, the way she pulled me down to her so no one would hear what she said. You would have to have been there to experience what she was doing to me.
And I have to say, you were afraid of her for years, right?
Yeah. Oh, I bet.
Years later, I mean, up till recently, right? You were afraid of her.
Right.
Now, we should also say, and this kind of blows me away too, is after this whole thing, Clinton continued to call you.
Oh yes, for a period of up to 2 to 3 months. The first few phone calls that came through, I told my assistant, and what was uncomfortable was she did not know what had happened to me, and she would say, "Mr. Clinton's on the phone," and I would say, "Please tell him I'm busy," and that puzzled her, but I never went into it with her. And then I had the unfortunate experience of answering the phone one day when she wasn't there to answer. And I pick up the phone, and I have my usual greeting, say, Brownwood Manor, Mrs. Hickey, where can I direct your call? And then all of a sudden he comes on, and he said, "Hi, this is Bill." He said, "When are you coming to Little Rock again?" And I just either said never or just hung up. I was disgusted that he would even begin to say that to me. It's like he was saying, "Hey, that wasn't anything. Let's do it again."
And then I guess in 1984, you won a Best Nursing Home Award or something, and he hand wrote on the letter, "I admire you very much." Now your marriage fell apart in part because of this, right?
Yeah, my husband, my second husband, never wanted me to come forward. And when I finally did, he was supportive, but then it was just like this big elephant in the room in our relationship from then on, and it finally did end in divorce. I wasn't a pleasant person to be around. I just like I say in my book, he had his problems, but I was not pleasant.
It just seems to me an irony that throughout this Clinton's marriage is held apart, and the victim in this case in part lost her marriage and maybe another marriage related to the suffering that happened from this. We're talking with Juanita Broaddrick. She charged Bill Clinton with rape. I think you've just heard all the circumstances. This is Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell, 1490 WGCH Greenwich, and we'll have more on the aftermath in the next segment. Our guest is survival of sexual assault by the powerful Juanita Broaddrick. Juanita, it was 1978. You waited till 1999 to come forward. You filed some affidavits vowing it didn't happen. You recall Jane Doe 5 in the Paula Jones case, where you wrote, "They were unfounded rumors. Mr. Clinton had made unwelcome sexual advances towards me in the late 70s. These allegations are untrue." Tell us your motive, your thinking, and why you waited and went through these kind of gyrations for what was a true story.
Sure. Be happy to. Back in 1998, I had just absolutely thrown myself into my business. I had become very successful and had also started another nursing home for children. And it was something I never wanted to come forward. When I was named Jane Doe number 5 in the Paula Jones suit, I was irate. I told my attorney, I said, I do not want to be involved. My life is going along just fine, and I do not want to be involved in this. I will deny it, which is what I did. I knew if I denied, I would never be called. So that's exactly what I did. I was absolutely disgusted that someone would pull me into their own lawsuit, for their own financial gain. I didn't know Paula Jones at the time. I do now, and I respect, whatever she had to go through to make her lawsuit effective. I understand that. But I was just incensed that I was being drug into this. So, I was outed in a situation I never wanted to talk about.
If you hadn't been outed, you would never have come forward?
No.
And in 1999, when you did come forward for the first time, it was because you were outed? Or you just decided, I've had enough of this, I got to, I'm going forward with it?
No, it was because of Ken Starr. When Ken Starr notified my attorney that I would be interviewed and deposed, my son, who's an attorney, came to me. He had known since he was 18 or 19 years old what had happened and had always supported me through this in my decision not to come forward. But he came over to my home that day after my attorney called him and said, they're going to depose her. And so he said, Mom, you got to come forward. And I said, no, I am not coming forward. And he talked to me for quite a while and said, Mom, Paula Jones was a civil suit. He said, this is federal. You have to. You just don't have a choice. So that's what ultimately made me tell the truth to the Dave Shipper's attorneys.
All right. I want to know about if there was any intimidation by the administration or whatever. Your business was audited. You think that was fishy at all?
Oh, yeah. It was only 2 months after I came forward on the NBC Dateline.
So you have no qualms. And obviously you passed it. There was no reason why you were being audited.
No. In fact, we were credited with a refund, which took a year for them to pay. Small amount, but we did get a refund.
Did you have any idea who would have authorized that? I mean,
no.
An individual. All right, let me ask you. The campaign and it has hired private investigators to try to get women either to be pressured not to come forward or even to sign affidavits. And Betsy Wright, who was his chief of staff as governor, called. We were trying to control bimbo eruptions. Did you feel that PIs, or were you investigated in any way?
Well, I always felt like I was followed, and of course those two investigative people that came to my front door during the Paula Jones lawsuit, they recorded me, and I told them, I said, I'm not coming forward. And of course they mentioned his name, but I didn't. And that interview is in my book. I had no idea I was being recorded. But my not coming forward was my choice. Mm-hmm. No one ever intimidated me or paid me off to not come forward. That was strictly my choice.
You describe in the book being the victim of abuse by your mother, and Clinton was the victim of abuse by his father. Do you relate in any way to that? Does it give him an excuse at all, or totally?
No.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, if it had been a one-time only thing, I could, you could understand. Maybe counseling would help. Yeah. But no, not with the serialness of Bill Clinton. No, I don't think so.
Something that's always bothered me is, and maybe this is unfair because I don't have all, what goes on in their life, but it struck me as rather than Hillary helping facilitate destroying all the women, Why not say, Bill, this is an ultimatum. Go get, if you need therapy for sex addiction or something. And we don't know if she may have done that, but it seems that she turned her eyes in the wrong direction and then basically was an enabler.
Right, exactly, by blaming the women, which had no control over the situation.
All right, let's go. First of all, you filed the lawsuit in 1999 against Clinton? What was that about?
Well, no, I didn't do that. I guess you could say I did do it. Mm-hmm. But Larry Klayman with Judicial Watch contacted me, and he said, we understand that they have a file on you in Washington. Would you like to know what's in it? And I said, sure, I'd be happy to. So that was the reason for the lawsuit.
Okay. So now going public, basically your first interview, and this was the famous Dateline interview, was NBC of 1999. Lisa Myers really pursued you almost, and telling you how important this was that it become public and that you come out with. And tell us the story about it. NBC initially does not air it even. They don't run it before the impeachment. It almost sounds like mainstream media behaving in a censorship way.
Yeah, I was so disgusted. I had finally consented to the interview. They were here at my home for probably upwards towards 6 to 8 hours, taping and doing the interview. And I think it was down to about 30 minutes when it was aired. And it was supposed to air on about 10 days later. And when it didn't air, Lisa kept calling me and saying, we're still doing investigating. They're still investigating everything that I had told them. And I was disgusted. I felt like I had been used. And I felt it was just so important for this to come out during the impeachment trial, and which it didn't. And I remember one time Lisa calling me, excuse me, and saying, well, I have good news and I have bad news. And she said, the good news is you're credible. And I thought, oh, here it comes. And she said, the bad news is you're very credible. And I did not know what to do with that at the time. I did not understand it.
I found it incredible. When I read that you were the bad news was you were very credible. Now, in this 6 hours of taping, which also was very emotionally tough for you, they had to stop it a few times. You were not allowed to mention Hillary Clinton at all.
Right, and that was a shock. And people say, well, why did you wait to come out until 2016 about Hillary? And I said, I came out years ago about Hillary. And I said, and I would try to explain to people, I tried to come out in the interview. When Lisa and I started to talk about if I'd ever been intimidated or threatened, and I began to relate the incident with Hillary Clinton, the producer rushes into my living room and says, no, we cannot go there. And Lisa and I look at each other very puzzled, and he said, we cannot talk about Hillary. He said, we can only talk about Bill Clinton. So when she asked me the question again, I was so naive. I'd never been interviewed before in my life. I couldn't talk about Hillary. She was the only one that had ever intimidated or threatened me. So when Lisa asked it again, I have to reply no, where I should have said, hell no, pardon me the expression. But yes, I was intimidated, but I wasn't allowed to.
Why is it, do you think, that NBC was doing that? She wasn't a candidate for president or anything in 1999.
I wish I knew. To this day, I don't understand it.
Now, we should say this is the one of the only episodes of Dateline, this, as you say in your book, that is never re-aired, right?
Right.
It is on your website, people should know,
yes.
Which is JuanitaBroaddrick.com. The other thing that struck me, because Kathleen Willey told me this too, in relation to a lack of support from women's groups or feminist groups, and Kathleen had tried to call Gloria Allred, who we all know, and she's been big in the Bill Cosby case, and Gloria would not even return her phone calls.
Yeah, I think that is so sad. Kathleen just happened to be like me on the other side of the political ladder. And that's what you were talking about in the beginning. This shouldn't be a conservative or a liberal thing. This should be any victim should be able to come forward and be heard.
I will say, John just told me, Iannuzzi, our producer here, that actually Hillary was a candidate for the Senate when you would have had this interview.
And that's when I wrote a letter, an open letter to Hillary. And I discussed in that letter, that was back when she first ran for senator. And it was published in some newspaper in the Northeast and also on all of the websites like New Republic and others. I can't remember offhand who they were. But I was hoping the people of New York would understand who they were going to elect.
Now, I will say there's one other NBC-related incident here, which is also pretty disillusioning. Andrea Mitchell, who has a great reputation, said that, Juanita's story has been discredited, and she discounted it.
Right. That was on the Today Show, and I think that was in June of 2016. I can't remember the date.
Yeah, 2016, folks. Hear that.
Yeah, and I was absolutely just disgusted that she could say I'd been discredited. And so my son saw it at the same time, and being the attorney, he wrote a letter to NBC, which eventually resulted in them removing discredited from their website. But we wanted an apology, and we wanted it on the Today Show, but of course we never got that. They just removed it from their website.
Okay, so what I want to do now is talk about how this doesn't go away. Tell us a little bit. Your marriage has collapsed in part due to this. You had anxiety attacks. Tell us over the 40 years the ways in which it has not gone away.
One instance would be my church. I was Episcopalian, and I even had to change my church service because in the regular church service of the Episcopalian, in the Book of Common Prayer, they would pray for the government, which would start with the president, the governor, and go on down to the mayor. And they would mention their names. And I changed from the regular service to the morning service, early morning, so I wouldn't have to hear his name. They would just say the position. Just little things like that, and then having to see him on TV all the time. It was a race on who could switch the channel the quickest, my husband or I. It was forever there.
Did you have I think you had anxiety attacks, right? For a long time.
Yeah, now that was after the rape. For about upwards toward 5 years, I would have anxiety attacks, and it was overwhelming. If anybody's ever had an anxiety attack, I would always wake up in the middle of the night and have to go outside to the porch, just anywhere where I felt like I could breathe. These gradually subsided about 5 or 6 years after the rape. And thank goodness they did. They were unbearable.
And you directly attribute that to the rape?
Oh, yeah, I'd never had anything like that before.
And they went away of their own accord, or?
Yes, gradually.
Now, you also had fear of enclosed spaces?
Right. Now, that was when I was a child.
Oh, okay.
I always had fear, and I think that had to do with my mom and her physical abuse. I was just so afraid of closed spaces.
Did getting physically abused by your mom, and then what happened in the Camelot Hotel, did they trigger similar types of things, or what?
No, I gradually, I had mental abuse from my mom after I faced the situation as a child, and she no longer physically abused me, but her mental abuse continued, and emotional abuse continued throughout my life until she was in her late 80s. And it was different. It was different. It was constant, but it wasn't the severe and sudden abuse that I suffered at the hands of Bill Clinton. They were very different.
Okay. You talked about this briefly, but maybe a little bit more on it. How did it impact the breakup of your second marriage? You said you were not easy to live with. Put a little bit more on that.
It was like I had finally put it out there for the world to see, and I felt ashamed. I think it affected me emotionally. If I would go down to Walmart or if I would go to town, I would think people were looking at me thinking, oh, my gosh, there's that woman. And I would always think, I wonder if they believe me, if they know what I had to go through and what I've suffered. And it was just an emotional drain to me. And it did affect my life and my marriage in the way that I wasn't as loving. I wasn't emotionally stable. And I would approach emotional issues differently after I knew that everybody knew.
What did this do to your son, or how did it affect him once you said, I think you told him at 18 or 19 years old?
It was, I got much more support from my son than anyone. He would always, if something would occur that would, in the news or something to do with Bill Clinton, he would call me and he'd always say, "Are you okay?" And I'd say, "Yeah, I'm doing fine. Don't worry about it." But he was always my strongest supporter, and I can never thank him enough for that. He's such a strong child.
All right, we're down.
He's going on 49.
We're going down to the last minute and a half or so. You say in your book that when the women were at the start of the Trump #2 debate, that may well have been a changing point in the campaign. Do you feel any different now with things like, paying off porn stars and all these rumors? Do you feel used or not?
That's still for debate. As far as being used, I feel like I was given an opportunity to come to a very public forum to tell my story to millions that had never heard it. And I think that was important. And as I say in the book, whether I was used or not, I really didn't care. I felt like this was my opportunity. It was Kathleen's and it was Paula's and it was Kathy Shelton's. We had been told to shut up for years. And we were given an opportunity to come forward again. And I'm thankful for that.
You're listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell. We'll get to our last segment coming right up, Free at Last. From Philly to Fresno, Brooklyn to Boston, Data Cable Superstars has the best prices on installation of Cat 5 and Cat 6 wiring for cameras, computers, phone, and data, specializing in off-peak installs as to not interrupt your workflow. If this is an I need it done yesterday situation, then it's time to call Data Cable Superstars at 203-942-1427 or go to datacablesuperstars.com. That's Data Cable Superstars, all one word, .com. Data Cable Superstars, where estimates and big ideas are always free. And we're back, our final segment with Juanita Broaddrick, 40 years of suffering. I got the sense from you, and I'll let you say it in your own words now, I also got this from Paula Jones, that the Hillary Clinton loss and the Clintons moving off stage took a weight off your shoulders and almost made you feel free. Oh, yes, there's no doubt. I stayed up the night of the election until I was sure that Mr. Trump had won and Hillary had lost. And it was a victory. I have no idea how much of a part I played in that, but it was a victory. It's like the world had been lifted off my shoulders, and I was free. I cannot imagine what it would have been like had Hillary been elected president. I just don't know. It would have been unbearable for me. Fascinating. Hillary Clinton said, "Every survival of sexual assault deserves to be heard, believed, and supported." Oh, my goodness. Did she open her mouth or not? I mean, whenever that came out at the end of 2015, I couldn't believe that those words were coming out of her mouth. She had no right. She had no right for those words to come out of her mouth. And I learned how to go on Twitter from my grandson. And that's when I tweeted what I did back in January the 6th, 2016, when I answered her. And, Jim, I did not say anything that I hadn't said over the last 20 years. But it was sudden, and it was to the world. When I did that, and I punched tweet, like I say in my book, all hell broke loose. And my son calls me and says, "Mom, what did you do?" And I had to reply, "I don't know." I had no idea the power of Twitter, that
that tweet that I sent out was instant, and like I said, into the world. And my phone started ringing off the wall.
An interesting thing I thought also was that you heard an interview with Trump, and he used, and someone was talking about the Clinton's alleged women's issue, and Trump added at the end, and rape. You said that was the first time that you'd really linked that to you, and it gave you a sense of empowerment.
It really did. For years I had said sexual assault, and it validated me coming from President Trump. Candidate Trump at the time. And from then on, I could use the word and not feel bad about it. It empowered me to be able to say, yes, I was raped by Bill Clinton. That's the appropriate word.
What do you think about, now, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is a Democrat from New York. She said that in retrospect, President Clinton should have resigned. What do you think about that and the hashtag Me Too movement?
As far as the Me Too movement, I feel like, now this is personal, I feel like it was for the Hollywood crowd and for the liberal people. I think what I worry about now is all of the women all over the world that came through and said, Me Too. Where are they now? Where have they had the space to process what they tweeted? What's going to be done about them? You see all these women on the front of Time magazine, but all of the Clinton victims were never included in that, and I think that's a shame.
At this stage, what accountability do you want former President Clinton to have, or just getting it off your chest is enough?
Well, I don't think we'll ever have any accountability from President Clinton. I think that he has denied it for so long and is in that pattern that he will never, ever come forward. He apologized to me once in person, but I can't ever see him. I would love to have a public apology, but I know that it's something that I'll never get.
All right. I think it's important, obviously, for you to have an identification apart from this whole Clinton issue. At the time you built the best nursing homes in the state, there probably weren't many women running a business like that, right?
Oh, no, there weren't. It was mostly men. You saw very few women running nursing homes and operating and owning them. Yeah.
You supported a Liberian refugee family that you didn't even know, and you kind of closed the circle with your mom, that she probably had some remorse. Talk about those sort of good things in your life that are apart from this Clinton story.
Oh, yeah. I'm so proud to have done that. I helped build a home in Monrovia, Liberia, for a refugee family that I had met over the Internet, and that was very rewarding. It took a process of over a 2-year period to have the home built for them, which they now still live in, and I still communicate with them. They have their iPhones, and I communicate with them regularly. In fact, they had twins about 8 years ago, and it was a little boy and a little girl, and they named the little girl after me. So I've got a little namesake in Liberia.
It's pretty amazing. When I read that first sentence, I said, "Oh my God, that's one of those email scams." Send money.
I know, I did too. Until my friend Julia Malone, she was a reporter from Cox Newspaper Group out of Washington, and she was absolutely wonderful to go with me on that excursion to meet my family.
So you're 75 years old, you feel the weight off your shoulders, and you're still playing regular tennis.
Yes. Yes, I love it.
Are you good?
Well, I'm pretty good.
By the way, I will say that that comment we just went through on Hillary Clinton about every survivor, blah, 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 it is in the New York Times effectively as of yesterday that in her 2008 campaign, one of the senior folks was nailed for sexual harassment, and Hillary refused to fire him.
Yeah, that was really something. That's really being talked about now. But what else can you expect from a serial enabler that has done that to the victims of her husband? This was just a staffer.
Well, put a pause in there. I want to say that this book was self-published. There's no guile, there's no power, there's no motive. You didn't do this on some huge contract from a publishing house, right?
Right, yeah, just self-published.
And you've never made money off of this whole deal. Hopefully the book, though, will sell well.
I'm hoping so. No, I've never accepted money from anyone. I made my own money very honestly.
Thanks to Juanita Broaddrick. Second time we've had her on. Always, I say I would bet my house on your credibility. The book is You'd Better Put Some Ice on That, How I Survived Being Raped by Bill Clinton. Her website is JuanitaBroaddrick.com. I went on it. You'll find that NBC interview with Lisa Miles. You'll find all the depositions that involved her, Paula Jones. You'll find that IRS letter on that audit. And President Clinton's depositions are on there. You'll hear him describe Monica Lewinsky as a friend of Betty Curry's.
Yes.
This has been Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell, podcast at WGCH.com. We have a YouTube. You can search Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell or Park City Productions 06604. We'll see everybody next Monday evening at 6 p.m. for another edition of Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. Juanita, thanks again.
Oh, thanks, Jim. Nice talking to you.